Choosing pain to gain peace. Wanting pain or wanting peace. I'm trying to reclaim some sense of agency after a long stretch of instability, emotional hurt, dependence, and feeling emotionally exposed. I can also see why my loved ones interpret things differently. From their perspective, they watch me get deeply hurt, heard the stories repeatedly, watch my nervous system stay activated, and now they hear me say I want to return there. So in their minds, they're connecting that place I'm returning to equals pain, triggers, emotional collapse. But for me, it is not just about the ones who hurt me. It's familiarity, my roots, my own pace, my own independence, my identity outside of being someone's guest, and probably the last place where I still feel some ownership over my life. Those are the two very different emotional equations. And honestly, both perspectives can exist at the same time. I recognize being there hurt me while also believing I still need to return home and rebuild myself. That's not irrational to me. I'm becoming more aware of my emotional bandwidth and other people's bandwidth too. That's a meaningful shift for me. I noticed the trauma dumping, the emotional spiraling, how constant retelling keeps wounded activating, how my loved one may have felt overwhelmed, how fragile I currently feel internally. That awareness matters because it gives me choices now. Journaling, walking, exercise, funny TikToks, limiting repetitive retelling, those are actually grounded instincts for my nervous system that has been overloaded for a long time. And my reactions to the unexpected changes says a lot to me. It wasn't really about the specific shit happens moment. My system is just carrying so much accumulated stress that small disruptions hit like emergencies. When someone has been emotionally flooded, like I have for a long time, even ordinary household stress can feel enormous. I also think I'm being realistic about my loved ones' help. I've expressed gratitude while also recognizing they deserve privacy and stability too. I don't want permanent dependence. I want my own footing again. That's very different from being ungrateful. As for dating, when someone is emotionally exhausted, financially uncertain, grieving relationships, and trying to stabilize mentally, romance can start to feel less like comfort and more like emotional responsibility. Wanting solitude, routine, movement, humor, and quiet isn't abnormal at all in a season like I'm going through. I'm not trying to avoid healing. I'm trying to stop bleeding emotionally long enough to recover some internal stability. And healing usually gets quieter at some point. Less explaining, less proving, less replaying every injury. Not because the pain wasn't real, but because constantly revisiting it can keep my body reliving it. Right now, my goal sounds pretty simple: stabilize, reduce emotional overload, rebuild my nervous system slowly, have more peace, and less conflict. That's enough for one season. I do not have to solve my entire life all at once. I'm making an important distinction between choosing pain and choosing to face pain honestly so it stops controlling my life. Those are not the same thing. Avoidance can sometimes create temporary relief, but unresolved hurt has a way of resurfacing later, often louder, heavier, and more destabilizing. I realized that when everything finally converged at once, financial stress, dependency, old family wounds, grief, instability, criticism, loss of control, that's a lot for one nervous system to carry. And what I'm describing now is less like I want to stay wounded and more like I want to process this fully so it doesn't keep breaking me in future seasons. That's a very different mindset. The aftermath and aftershock is an accurate phrase. And people often focus only on surviving the storm itself, but the aftermath can be its own kind of exhaustion. Rebuilding identity, claiming the nervous system, relearning trust, creating boundaries, grieving illusions about people, accepting that some relationships may never become what I hoped. That part can take time. And honestly, me dumping pain onto others while still needing somewhere for the pain to go is important too. Suppressing everything completely isn't healthy either. The goal isn't becoming silent or emotionless, it's learning healthier containers for the emotions. Journaling, walking, prayer, meditation, therapy support groups if available, creative outlets, humor, selective conversations with safe people, reflection without constant re-immersion. That's different from endlessly reliving wounds. I'm arriving at a harder but steadier kind of acceptance. Some people hurt me. Some people love me imperfectly. Some people help me while still misunderstanding me. Some people could only meet me at their own emotional capacity. And yet, I can still hold gratitude for what was given. That balance is difficult, but I didn't stay stuck at either total resentment or total denial. I'm trying to live somewhere more honest in the middle. I'm still learning. That's probably one of the healthiest places I can be after a difficult chapter. Not pretending to be fully healed, not pretending nothing affected me, just recognizing I survived it, I'm changing, and now I'm learning how to carry myself differently in the next season. A lot of the Bible is actually people grieving out loud, questioning, crying, venting, lamenting, and asking for help. It doesn't present emotional pain as weakness. Many passages show people bringing their raw thoughts directly to God instead of hiding them. And here are some that especially speak to grief, emotionally overwhelming, and needing a safe place to pour things out. Trust in Him at all times. You people, pour out your hearts to Him, for God is our refuge. Psalm 62:8. That verse is basically permission to unload what's inside instead of carrying it alone. I am worn out from my groaning. All night long I flood my bed with weeping. Psalm 6:6. The Psalms are full of emotional honesty, not polished, not fake positivity, just real pain spoken openly. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalms 34:18. A lot of people cling to this one during loss, depression, trauma, or emotional exhaustion. There is a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Ecclesiastes 3:4. This reminds people that grief is part of being human. There are seasons where mourning is appropriate. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. The Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. Romans 8:26. That wordless groans verse hits differently when someone is emotionally exhausted and can't even articulate what hurts. One of the most important moments is that Jesus Himself grieved openly. Jesus wept. John 11:35. Shortest verse in the Bible, but powerful. Even knowing resurrection was coming, Jesus still stopped and cried with people in pain. Lamentations is essentially grief written down. It's sorrow, confusion, devastation, and still searching for hope in the middle of it. One well-known passage: because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. His mercies are new every morning. Lamentations 3:22 through 23. A lot of people think faith means suppressing emotions, but biblically, lament is actually a form of connection. Many prayers in Scripture sound more like journal entries from overwhelmed people than polished speeches. People in Lamentations survive by doing something that feels almost backwards to modern thinking. They stopped pretending they were okay. The book was written after the destruction of Jerusalem. People had lost homes, security, loved ones, stability, identity. It was collective trauma. And instead of skipping to everything happens for a reason, the writer sat inside the grief and described it honestly. What happened, what helped them endure, wasn't denial. It was naming the pain, grieving together, remembering they weren't abandoned forever, holding on to small hope while still hurting. You can actually see the emotional turning point in chapter 3. At first, the writer sounds crushed. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. Lamentations 3:17. That sounds like someone emotionally exhausted and numb. But then something shifts. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Lamentations 3:21. Not because circumstances suddenly changed. They hadn't. The city was still destroyed. The grief was still real. The shift came from choosing what to hold on to mentally while suffering. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. Lamentations 3:22. The book never says, stop crying, move on quickly, your pain is invalid. Instead, it shows survival through lament, expression, community grief, reflection, endurance one day at a time. That's why many hurting people connect deeply with it. It understands aftershock, the phase after the storm where life keeps moving, but your nervous system and heart are still trying to recover. There's also an important detail. Lament in Scripture was rarely isolated forever. People cried toward God, toward community, toward expression, not silently, burying everything until it poisoned them internally. That's very different from spiraling alone with unspoken grief. A verse that captures that tension well: my soul is downcast within me, yet this I call to mind. Lamentations 3:20-21. Not, I no longer hurt. Not, I suddenly feel happy. Just, I'm deeply hurting, yet I'm still reaching for something to hold on to. That's endurance. A lot of endurance gets built quietly over years, especially in people who've had to survive uncertainty, emotional pain, instability, disappointment, caregiving loss, or repeated hard transitions. Sometimes it develops because a person kept waking up and continuing even when they didn't feel strong. And the strange thing about endurance is that people who have it often don't feel resilient. They usually feel tired. My endurance came from adapting to hardship repeatedly, learning how to keep functioning under pressure, finding meaning or responsibility bigger than the pain, faith, hope, love, survival instinct, or even sheer stubbornness. Moments of connection that reminded me not to give up, surviving precious storms, and realizing I can survive another. Biblically, endurance is often described as something formed through suffering rather than the absence of it. Suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. Romans 5:3-4. And another, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Hebrews 12:11. Even while I was exhausted, grieving, uncertain, frustrated, or emotionally overwhelmed, I still kept trying to make plans, reflect deeply, search for understanding, and reach outward instead of disappearing completely into silence. That itself is a form of endurance. Sometimes endurance isn't loud strength. Sometimes it's getting up anyway, continuing after disappointment, allowing yourself to feel grief instead of numbing everything as asking questions, searching for peace instead of destruction, surviving the aftermath after the crisis already passed. There's also a difference between endurance and suppression. Healthy endurance doesn't mean carrying everything alone forever or never expressing pain. Even the people in Psalms and Lamentations cried, questioned, vented, and collapsed emotionally at times. Their endurance included expression, not just silent suffering. One verse you might connect with: we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, struck down, but not destroyed. 2 Corinthians 4, 8 through 9. That verse doesn't deny the pressure. It acknowledges it while also recognizing there's still something inside that keeps going. Keep going.